What's going on, everybody? It's Freedo and Weagle here today to do another meta discussion. It's been quite a while since we've been able to do one of these because there's been so many major changes to the game over the past few weeks, but the dust has settled on those changes, and I think it's a good time to perceive where a lot of these heroes are sitting. And I think the top of the list, the ones we should cover right away, is probably Soldier and Pharah. They have an interesting relationship, and I think after the most recent buffs to them have put them in a place where they're incredibly strong. I think we might want to talk about some nerfs that could potentially come in to make them more reasonable. I don't think Pharah is necessarily overpowered, but I think her hang time probably could get taken a look at and still be fair for everybody. And Soldier has been kind of out of order for a while as far as I'm concerned. Would you agree with that, Weagle?
Yeah, I think that Soldier's really good. I don't know what the consensus is in the whole community. I think that Soldier, a lot of people just want McCree to be as good as him, but then that could throw other things out of whack. But I think we need to make it clear that when we say we think Pharah and Soldier might get a slight nerf, I mean, I really think slight is the word there. I think, especially with Pharah, she could easily just become irrelevant if she was just a little bit worse. It's one of them heroes because originally the only change she really had was to a jetpack, and it just allows her to be at the perfect distance. Her actual raw DPS isn't very good, so she really has to be hitting all of her shots from a long way away, and I think it'd be very easily to knock her completely out of meta, and I don't want that because I think she adds a great dynamic to the game. So I think that she might get a slight nerf, and I think that Soldier may get one too. I think he's quite as outrageous as Freedo does, and we were talking a little bit before making this video about maybe all Soldier needs is to move slightly slower when shooting or something along them lines, because I think one of the most obnoxious things he can do is be able to just spray damage at you quite easily whilst moving really fast from side to side, so it's also quite difficult to kill him. And I think a slight nerf or change there in that direction is where to go. I don't necessarily think his damage needs to be brought down, or else he'll be where he was before. However, I would argue that he was used even when people said he wasn't. When people were saying how bad he was and he originally got that buff, he was actually used. He was just more of a niche pick. And I think the community's job there is to decide, would you rather have Soldier as the niche pick or McCree, who's more of a skill shot hero? You can let us know in the comments to what you think to that.
Yeah, I like the slowing down his movement, because what it would do is mean that characters like Hanzo, Widowmaker, McCree, when dueling Soldier, will have a little bit easier time, because right now, as anybody I think who plays a lot of those characters can tell you, when you're in those jiggle peek battles and he's head juking you constantly, it can feel like a nightmare, really. So I think you could even put his entire move speed down slightly and maybe adjust his sprint so that it is buffed to be where it is now. So he can still like run away and be mobile somewhat, but being able to be mobile and spray quite lethal damage, I think, is a little goofy. Now, as far as the Pharah issue is, I agree with everything Liam said, but I would see a world where she could still be really good and playable, finally. There's sections of the game where she was unplayable, which made me very, very sad, but maybe make her hang time a little bit more punishing, in that you had to be more situational and careful with it, because I think that's the main thing that really drives a lot of matchmaking players for a loop, because you can't really know where she's coming from because she has the ability to be where she wants in the air all the time. Now, I have, of course, made videos on how to counter this. When to pick Widowmaker is one, because she can stare up at the sky and remove her from wherever if you can play Widow. Otherwise, the 30-minute long epic that we uploaded yesterday on engaging on the ground properly is another way to make sure that you take away the value that she can bring. So those two heroes are incredibly strong, but the nice thing about this meta right now, and something that I think is important to note when you reach a place that we're in right now, is that so many heroes are viable, really. Like, we can mention, I think those two are nearer the top, but they're not must-pick in terms of how must-picks existed in the past. They're strong picks, maybe perhaps stronger than other picks if you can get them churning out, but I think just about every hero has some realm or map or situation that you could justify picking them to some degree, which is a great thing, and I think something that we should embrace and be happy about. So,
well, for me, there's some gems, and we're going to cover them in this video, and I think some heroes you wouldn't think are super great that we will go through in a minute. But the first thing is actually an overrated hero right now we need to talk about, and that's actually Reinhardt. For the first time ever, I feel like you don't have to have him like 90% of the time. It was true that you didn't if you ran like a specific comp anyway on attack, and he's still good on defense. I think that's very important to note, but the pros have been playing him a lot less, and with that Pharah pick being popular and everyone wanting to play Genji, Reinhardt's shield isn't having the same effect as it used to. And I think that Orisa as well is suffering the same problems because I think she's quite weak to dive. And she's just getting wrecked by all the different angles with a huge hitbox. And Reinhardt's suffering from the same thing. I was thinking to myself a little bit, imagine if Orisa was around in the triple tank Ana meta where she could heal everything and there were barriers everywhere already. That could have been really scary. But right now, with everything being really fluid, both of them actually aren't that great. Now, I'd still much rather have a Ryan than an Orisa, don't get me wrong, but he's just being taken apart from every direction right now, and I think you have to be careful when to pick him. Even on defense recently, if you're struggling, I've noticed this, my team will be struggling, and everything's coming from every angle, and a soldier will take the high ground, and what we've been doing is going D.Va Winston. And it's been working out quite well. And there's some maps where it's particularly good, like some of the payload ones. Gibraltar's really good, and Numbani, both really good on defense if you have a Winston and a D.Va.
I think you're completely right. One thing is that when you have that far over the top, creating and stretching an angle that way, it sort of makes more room for the Tracer in the back or the Genji, and then Tracer just farms up free pulse bombs and blows up Reinhardt quite easily. I think Rein's still playable, but now you're in a Rein meta where you have to be very strong with Rein to succeed with him, whereas before, everything was sort of set up for you. I mean, there was a time where Rein's shield barely ever got shredded before Soldier's damage got increased, which maybe is an interesting change that was able to accomplish to at least punish poor Rein shield positioning and really force you to think about keeping that barrier. But now I think it's even harsher in terms of you better be taking your positioning very, very carefully, because if you don't, you very quickly will get punished. Now, the dive tanks on both offense and defense, I think, is really smart because it gives you that flexibility. And of course, I've made in videos in the past that I hope Orisa gets buffed to the point where she is a stronger Rein replacement against dive, but I do agree that she's not really there yet. Some cute little strategies that some pros have tried to use in specific situations would be like to put an Orisa on top of a Torb turret so that it gets protected, and it's kind of goofy and niche, and I think in a few buffs, maybe you might see Orisa become playable.
I mean, you might as well put her on top of Soldier, really, if you know what I mean. I mean, just get her to protect him or something. I don't know. I do question that sometimes where I was looking at it, and I know Torb is separate and he can do some great damage, but you're protecting a turret that does like, what is it, 50 DPS? It's something really weak. So I don't know how much I like that strategy, and I don't think I've seen any top tier pros use it.
The best teams, however, like let's say I think Rogue's the best in NA right now, for instance, but they have always been breaking the meta. I mean, Soon's been playing Tracer against Triple Tank, and he's still playing Tracer now and wrecking everything, and they're really succeeding with either in the pure triple DPS dive comp or even winning a pharmacy battle in air for aerial superiority. They're just good at everything, really, so they don't even have to resort to those cheese. But I think inherently Torb can be strong against dive because it gives you that extra angle of attack that auto aims on little zippy flankers, but just setting it up is so difficult. Like his gun himself is not very good at fighting the flankers. He probably wants to be pegging tanks and healers, because shooting a Genji in the air as Torb, I think, requires quite a lot of skill. If you can do that, man, you're going to wreck them. Believe me, I can't do that. But that's what the turret kind of does. It creates this annoying angle that punishes their movement, I think, and zones them into a location. But Torb's got a few changes, but he's always an interesting character, I think. What do we think? Do we want to mention Symmetra? We mentioned Torb. It's funny to me, Symmetra's pick rate, I think, hasn't really changed that much in popularity, despite the fact that everybody knows Pharah is insane, which I don't really get, to be honest.
Well, I mean, this is a whole different subject, so we'll try and not go too far into it. It's a whole new video on its own, but it's difficult to talk about without upsetting people, I think. And that's that some picks do enforce other picks for your team and for their team. And people don't really think about that in matchmaking at all. People don't realize, like, if you've got a McCree, you pretty much need a Reinhardt. Not always, but you could do with one. And there's a lot of picks like that when someone makes something on your team, you have to pick around it. And Symmetra's one of them. And people keep picking her, but I don't think they realize that Winston's been picked a lot. Pharah's been picked a lot. People don't think about that. They just take the hero because they've had success with it in the past. But right now, I see Sim get rolled 99% of the time because there's always a Pharah, there's usually a Winston, and he doesn't really do a lot. But onto some hidden gems, I think. I don't know where to start, but all of the hidden gems right now are some of my favorite heroes to play, so it makes me really happy. I think the first one to talk about is Mei, actually, because Mei right now is good, and I think it's for a few reasons. One of them being that Lucio's speed boost isn't used as much right now because he doesn't really speed everyone enough. And people are still picking him, but they're kind of just diving at people, DSP stankying it up, wall riding. I haven't seen too much speed boost used a lot. So the Mei's wall is just really good again right now. And I find that in matchmaking, because I'm good with hitting shots with her, I don't struggle too much against Pharah. Even though Pharah should counter Mei, kind of, if you can get her in the right place and force her into the right places, I don't think it's as much of a hard counter. And I find it hard to really put my finger on it exactly, and maybe Freedo can do that. But every time I'm picking Mei right now, it's working out really good. And I don't know if that's just because maybe people have forgotten how good she is, so they don't expect it. And then there's a wall in between the whole team, and I'm having a lot of success with it.
As the Pharah main, I will defend that Pharah definitely should beat Mei, but one thing that's definitely true that is a main principle of yesterday's video, of course, is Mei is really strong at winning the ground game. So if you can somehow split off the enemy team quite well and win the ground game, and as long as you have something to deal with the Pharah, Mei isn't as bad as it could be, because she's so good at doing that. So that's how that works. I think I pretty much agree with everything else you said. It's harder to speed boost your team out of Mei's ultimate as well, because he's going to have to be really close to them and in the blizzard, basically, to be able to get them out of it. So that's an interesting thing that has changed. And on to another point, I think that the healer meta has changed a little bit as well. I think Mercy is looking quite a bit better than she did in Season 3, because Lucio's healing aura got a buff, so that means that he physically can just deal more healing on the ground. So especially if you're sending that Mercy up to pharmacy combo, you're not really losing as much on the ground. Like, he's still not the best bulk healer, I'd say. You probably still want Ana for that because you can charge Nano and she does so many other things as well. But the Lucio Mercy combo is looking stronger than it did before, I think, because also, keep in mind, if the speed boost aura is smaller, then if you have less things on the ground, it's more likely they're going to be able to get them all organized together because your pharmacy's off flanking anyway, right? Like, she didn't really need the speed. She's setting up at some high angle. So that kind of strengthens that combo and that team comp as well, which I think is interesting.
So another hidden gem for me right now, and everyone's going to hate me for saying it, and I did a guide on it, but Hanzo right now, I really, really like Hanzo right now. And it goes back to the thing since release, really, with Hanzo. You do have to be careful when picking him because he is one of the hardest heroes in the game. But there's just so many things you can shoot with him, and I really like it. And with the game playing a little bit slower, especially in matchmaking, and I said this in the guide that I did, when you need to get picks, if you're good with Hanzo and Widow as well, it's so much easier to win 2 CP and hybrid maps because your team even if you do have a Lucio, so hard to use that speed boost sometimes. And people can be very stubborn in their picks, and when they are, pulling out that Hanzo or Widow is super, super strong and massively underrated in my opinion. They're still meme heroes. Hanzo's still more than Widow, and they do play at very different ranges, which again, people don't seem to realize. Hanzo's a much nearer a close range hero than a long one, I would say. Whereas Widow, you should be as far back as possible, but we've discussed before that there's a certain distance where you're then too far back as Widow because you're kind of out of the fight. So she's hard to implement in that way, but both of them right now, absolutely rate them. See a lot of people getting use out of them, especially when everyone's just playing this kind of pick style that they seem to want to play in matchmaking, especially on these slower maps. Not so much on King of the Hill. I try not to run him too much, but 2CP Hanzo is a dream for me.
It's interesting to me that a lot of players seem to say that they would like to see Widowmaker get buffed, and I don't think that's necessary at all, really. And I think she's underrated in the skill set of her pick rate, really. Like, she doesn't get picked enough, because especially if you're dealing with this Pharah issue, I think if they're dedicating 2 characters to the sky, if you can pick that one Widowmaker and stay alive and just zone her out, not even necessarily hunt her down to kill her, but zone out her airspace so that you funnel her into the lower ground fights, you're in a great spot. I think Widow's fine. And the speed of her body shots, even, like the rate of her charge got changed, I believe, so that she can more easily, like, charge up 2 shots to double body shot a character, which you might have to do against Pharmacy. I think the way the math works out most of the time that you're going to be able to do that even if she's getting pocketed. I could be wrong on that. You might need a 3rd shot, actually. But regardless, I still think you can challenge her quite well, and she's one of the best characters right now in the game. At least, of course, you always have the 1-shot headshot, right? So work on that. I think Widow is a great pick. The other one that I love to bring up all the time, I've said it in Season 3 of the tank meta, and I'm going to say it now, and it's Reaper. I don't know why I have like above 60% win rate on him with like 4 hours. I never get to play him, but I think Reaper is highly underrated, because especially when you're dealing with these divey characters where the Pharah might be setting up a Tracer or something, if you know how to position as Reaper, and I'm going to be making a video about this, guys, so don't you worry about that. If you know how to command the right locations and don't overstep yourself as Reaper, and you protect your backline, and you can just like enforce against the dive so well. So in the same way that I was talking about how like Torb kind of creates that other angle, well, Reaper creates this little bit of zone around him where easy insta-kills happen. So if Tracer's trying to dive in or Genji is near your supports, you can get big bursts of damage in on them quite easily. And of course, he wrecks Winston, who Winston is pretty good. I don't know what the pick rate is on Winston changing in the matchmaking meta. In the pro meta, obviously, it's sick, and which is another reason why I think he's underrated, because he deletes Winston.
Well, I want to talk about Winston. I want to talk about Winston if you're done, because Winston is being picked more, but he's still kind of underrated. But there's this other issue, and I don't know how to say it without being blunt, but there's a lot of people that don't really know how to play him and utilize his kit. And I think that even though they know he's better now, I don't think they've realized his true potential. And Winston is very, very good right now, especially with, as Freedo said, no one wanting to pick Reaper to counter it, really. Now, Roadhog's a fairly good counter as well, but I don't see as much of him either right now. But Winston is just, he's so good. But I see people walk up to the choke on Hanamura and drop his bubble. They don't know how to play him. They don't know that you have to jump in and drop your... If you jump in on the Ana and you drop the bubble, she can't heal anyone, right? Or anything, or even break the line of sight with the healers and their DPS or their tanks. All you have to do is dive in, land on something, which again, a lot of people don't seem to realize that if you jump as Winston and land on someone, or in a group of people, it does 50 damage to everyone near him. You drop the bubble, you cut off all the lines of sight. It's fantastic initiation, probably the best initiation in the entire game if you're good at it, and I think that he's underrated in that way. I think he's being picked more, but I don't think he's rated on his true value right now, where he is just really, really good. He always has been, but that bubble buff where he gets it more often, I think it's 6 seconds quicker now, whatever it is, very, very good and massively underrated. And I really recommend that you watch some pros, watch Miro, learn Winston properly, because a lot of people play him wrong, but if you can get it right, he's top 3 or 4 heroes in the game for me right now. I think he's really, really good.
My favorite Winston to watch by far is Nox on Rogue, because a lot of times in matchmaking you hear players say, well, I'm playing Winston, I must have an Ana. Well, a lot of times Rogue doesn't play with Ana, nor do they play with a Zarya. They're not bubbling this Winston. That's the big difference between Lunatic High's dive comp and Rogue's dive comp, is that Nox is getting things done just by mere smart initiation and positioning so that he gets himself in spots where he doesn't need to be pocket healed. And there's ways to play Winston that way, and it's difficult, and it's strategical and precise, but if you get good with that aspect of playing Winston, you can play him in any comp more or less, and see a lot more success, not just trying to face tank with him. That's not how you want to play. So more guides, I think, that we have to make. Winston's definitely sick.
I think there's a bunch of super meta heroes that we don't really need to mention. Lucio's still really good, but harder to use. Ana's really good. We've mentioned Winston. Zarya's still a pretty good pick most of the time, but stop picking Zarya Hog, everybody. Please, that's not acceptable. We need shielding. But Zarya's still really good. Hog's pretty good. In terms of hidden gems, I don't know if there's anyone out there other than the ones we've mentioned. I think that Hanzo, Mei, very good. Winston, Widow, very, very good right now. As Freedo said near the start, there are a lot of heroes that you can use. It's just there's some, Reaper and Mei probably being the 2 super underrated ones that don't get picked either, whereas Winston's like underrated in his overall value but gets picked. Whereas Reaper and Mei, pull them out, definitely. Definitely pull out the Mei on 2 CP because she's very, very good, and you'll get a lot of good use out of her if you know how to play her and split off the enemy team.
One last thing that I thought about his Soldier as well, I think has got to be said. The issue with him is that he doesn't make space for himself. So despite how much I want to whine about where he sits and he's kind of easy to play and maybe a bit too good, he doesn't create an opening. So he can't really flank that well, and he sort of has to let his tanks do the work. So luckily, on a lot of maps, Soldier just isn't very good, especially on attack, because you have to sort of run a massive mile marathon to try to get to a good spot where you can actually do something.
Well, the thing is, you can get away with that, though. That's the problem, is that people can get away with that on attack in matchmaking because it's not exploited. You see it a lot on maps like Gibraltar, where they'll have an attack soldier that will go onto the roof. No one really wants to run counter dive tanks, and you're in a lot of trouble on defense there. So I agree that he shouldn't be good on attack. However, he is getting away with it. I can guarantee it at times where he shouldn't be. I'm definitely seeing that.
No, you're definitely right. But like we said, you run those counter dive tanks on defense, I think you're going to start feeling the pressure of, like, if you just knock that soldier off the high ground, right? No, don't even kill him. You use Winston or Diva's boop to knock him off the high ground. He's not happy. Like, he could be taken directly out of the fight for many seconds, as opposed to the value he would have had when you, like, let him go up Dorado Street's flank side or something. You can very quickly counter that, I feel.
I think other heroes that are good, Tracer, Genji as always, McCree. Fuck that guy. I don't think anyone wants to pick McCree right now because they think he's terrible. He's not. I know it's a meme in the community. I don't know if I think he's massively underrated either. I just think he's really hard to get that maximum value. Flanker, punishing style. It's very difficult for a lot of people. And I think he will get some kind of a tweak in the near future. I think he has to. Unless Soldier does get a slight nerf in some way. I don't think they can possibly leave McCree where he is. I don't think they even serve the same job, really. I don't know. What do you think to that as a final point?
He feels easier to exploit than Hanzo, Widowmaker, and those are supposed to be like the most diveable characters. And that's the problem with McCree. If you have a team comp where they're playing mostly Deathball and like one Tracer, McCree's going to wreck them. But if you have Tracer, Pharah, Genji, then his job becomes much harder, and that's why oftentimes I say even I would prefer to play Reaper there. Then I can isolate my one duel and have a get out of jail free card with the Wraith form, whereas McCree really it's like hit shots or die, and then you hit them quick because you don't have much time, and then he just dies instantly, whereas Soldier at least can run away and heal himself, right? And that's kind of the breaking point, really. That's where it comes down to.
As a thought to kind of go out on, I think, is his buff potential, is it his flashbang? Is that what needs to be better? Because the thing about flankers is it's super easy to bait it out, super easy, and even if you don't bait it out with like Genji, for example, and you're in the air, or you Swift Strike, or something, anything, it's so hard for McCree to hit that follow-up shot anyway that a lot of the time, 99% of people can't follow up on a Genji that's been stunned in the air. Whereas if it's a Roadhog hook and you hook the Genji, he's dead straight away every time. And maybe that's where they could improve McCree rather than just making him do tons and tons of damage.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I wouldn't want to change his damage scale at all, really. The changes that I said either adjust the roll. People said reset it on elimination, which is cute. I think you get away with just reducing the cooldown entirely, even down to like 3 seconds or something. Wouldn't make much of a difference. And of course, if stun was incredibly reliable and maybe you removed even the bob animation, maybe that's a thing, because every hero has like a different head bob when they get stunned, which is kind of goofy, I think. Or at the very least, stop them in place entirely, make it more reliable, because like you say, you still have to hit a headshot on that thing, and it's not the easiest follow-up shot as compared to Roadhog, which maybe would fix the whole thing, maybe. Then you'd have a reliable insta-kill, which would be probably good for McCree.
Too OP. OP, please nerf 1 month later. That's the kind of thing that usually happens with these changes. But I think that's everything from us. If there's anything you guys think we missed, the comment section is the place to go. We'd love to read your thoughts on everything that we've said as well. Make sure you check out our Twitch, which we stream on a bit less now, but we're still doing it, hopefully a couple of times a week. Be sure to check out our Twitter and our Discord, where you can find the Winston main of your dreams. Have a great day as always, guys. Take care and peace, people.
Bye.